Hi, everyone. So today we're going to be talking about two different theories, cognitive development theory and sociocultural development theory. We do have a lot to go over today, so if I'm going a little bit quickly, you can always refer back to this to look at some of the different stuff that's in here, as I did list all of the examples. So cognitive development theory is Piaget's theory of development, which speaks to how a child develops their entire mental model of the world. As we run through all of these different examples, I'm going to constantly be pulling them back to this idea of our overall fitness and this idea that learning is like fitness, which is what our entire website is kind of based around. So we're going to be looking at two different pieces of cognitive development theory. The first one, we're going to be looking at a bunch of different definitions of different things that are used to talk about this theory. And then we're going to look at, very importantly, the stages of development. And in order for us to get a better understanding of what's going on, I'll be using a lot of examples for each. So, how we get the answer is more important than the actual answer. So the idea behind this is all about development over learning. That was his whole idea behind this, developed in the 1930s. So, schemas is the first vocabulary term that we're going to look at. These are the building blocks of thought. Some of them are subconscious and some of them are not, but essentially they make up everything that we already know. We have millions of them. So a great example of this would be all of the different things that you know about the idea of fitness. So some of them are conscious, some of them are self-conscious, right? So if you're going to the gym, you might know every different machine that you work out on. But you also know that when you're sweating too much or you're feeling a certain way, it's time to drink water. Additionally, you might know that even though you're getting a little sore because your muscles are fatigued, you know to push through the pain. So these are all of the building blocks and just things that generally, as a human, you know about fitness. The next concept that we're going to look at is equilibrium. So equilibrium relates the brain's understanding of everything. One can make absolute sense. If one can make absolute sense of their environment, then they are in a state of equilibrium. So the example that I would use here in terms of fitness is if you go to 24-hour fitness every single day at 6 a.m. with the same people, you have the same gym routine, you use the same machines, you might find yourself in a state of equilibrium. Now, that being said, obviously not everything is perfect. So this is more of a theory of you being in this equilibrium state. It's more difficult to pinpoint and say that, well, yes, everything would be the same, because you're obviously going to run into different roadblocks as you're running through all of these different things. And that's just, so, it's all theoretical. So, you have your stigmas and then you have your equilibrium, right? And then there are two kind of other things that are tied together here, assimilation and accommodation. So assimilation is the brain's way of drawing conclusions from existing knowledge when encountering a new situation. So the example I would use here, if you were always going to the gym and you just went to the one place where they had the Nautilus machines and the standing squat bar, and that was all you didn't necessarily go and take any live classes or anything like that. Maybe you went and you decided, okay, you know what, I am going to take a live class. And the live class was with all free weights, whereas you were usually used to squatting with a bar or using the leg press. Well, okay, you put the bar on your back and you're squatting with the bar. Now the teacher is saying, okay, we're going to squat with the weights. You could maybe infer, based on the schemas that you already have, to take the weights and place them on your shoulders and then squat up and down the exact same way that you would otherwise, based on your prior knowledge, and come up with something that's actually, the correct thing. Now, it's not always necessarily correct when you make an assimilation. The example that they gave in the reading that I find to be quite funny is this idea of, a child sees a guy with the bald top of his head and just has the hair here. So her inference is that guy is a clown, because she's only seeing clowns that have hair simply around in this area. So in the same sort of way, you're just making an assumption based on your prior knowledge, which then leads to your accommodation. So accommodation is going to be when the brain is introduced to a new schema, but the pre-existing knowledge in the brain is not sufficient enough to make sense of the new schema being introduced. It's a correction of an incorrect assimilation. So, for example, if you're in this live class, right, you don't have the knowledge necessarily of like a cardio burst, right? So let's say the teacher introduces something that has some fancy footwork and something kind of crazy. You might have absolutely no prior knowledge to base how you're going to behave in that situation within that class. So you're stuck there and you're looking around and you're looking at, the other students in the class and making a correction based on your observation in order to join into the cardio section of the class. So those are just kind of some very simple examples to kind of tie these things together. But using all of these different things is just the idea behind this cognitive development theory. So then if we move over here, we can look at kind of our different stages of development as laid out in this theory. Here I'm going to use an example of a child that likes football or toy football. So in the first stage, it's object permanence. So a child knows that an object exists even when it's taken away. So if you were to give a child a little toy football and they were playing with the football, this is between the ages of 0 and 2 where this stage is occurring. And they're playing with the football and you take the football away, the child still is aware of the fact that football exists. Maybe they would be looking for it. Maybe they'd be crying for it. They are aware of the fact that even though it's not in their sight, that it is something that's there. Your next stage is your pre-operational stage. So this is when a child is beginning to think in non-literal terms. It happens between the ages of 2 and 7. So they're thinking about the world in terms of concepts. So previously, the toy football was just a toy football. It was a toy football when it was with the child. It was a toy football when it was away from the child. But now that you're getting a little older, maybe the toy football represents something more. Maybe the toy football represents the concept of childhood and being a baby, or it represents playtime with your father and then a good memory. So it's starting to become a little more conceptual rather than just physically, here's the toy football, here's the object. Next stage is going to be your concrete operational stage. Now, this was the third stage that they stopped at for quite some time until they went into the last one, and it kind of can be broken into 2 sections. So the first section is thinking about and processing concepts without physically doing them. So there's a lot of different examples that you can use here. The one I chose to use, my favorite quarterback, Tom Brady, or he was before leaving the Patriots, right? You might know exactly the concept behind what it is that he does when he throws the football. You can study that concept. You understand that that concept exists without having to physically do that concept. So a child could know how he lets his fingers slide off the laces of the ball as he gets the certain spiral that he needs to project the ball in the correct way. And the child might have an understanding of this without actually doing it yet. And then when they pick up the football, they can apply that concept that they've only had as a concept up until that point to the physical action. The same time at this stage is the understanding of conservation. So that's understanding quantity. In the reading, the example that's spoken about is this idea of a cup of water. If you were to take a cup of water, like a standard cup, and pour it into a 2-cup glass, you pour it into a 3-cup glass versus a 2-cup glass, what it looks like is different, but the child understands that that's still the same amount of water. The last stage that we're going to look at is from ages 11 and onward, and it's the formal operational stage. So this is when you begin to think abstractly, drawing conclusions from abstract thought and then through testing hypotheses. So it can be, what's the point of life? What is the answer to, the point of why we're here, or all of these different kind of more abstract thoughts, and just thinking through even things, why do I do this during the day, or why do I do that during the day, and so, the example, just kind of a silly one, but running off this idea of the football, right? Maybe now you start to think, oh, wow, did the NFL players that I loved in the past that have maybe passed away, do they play football in heaven? Something that you can't even really imagine or see, but maybe you have this idea in your head of questioning something that is so abstract and beyond what you've known in the past. So what does this all lead to? So, the lead into all of this is going to be your active discovery learning. So the idea is that a child will learn best through doing. The focus is on the process of learning rather than the result. So daily practice and the process of learning a sport is just important as the end result. So without the process, the result will never occur. So it's the same way as, if you take a test and you don't show your work, you won't get full credit, right? So um, if, let's see, what's the best example I can think of here? So if you're playing soccer, the process of kicking the ball and following the rules and staying in bounds is going to be just as important as scoring a goal. Because if you pick up the ball and you run it down the field, the goal is not even going to count. So it's about the process of getting to that point. So then we only have a couple minutes left, so I'm going to try to move through this pretty quickly. So then we have sociocultural development theory, right? So this is the belief that pairing children and peers help develop a strong skill set. The guy that discovered this was an expert at pairing children with advanced peers. It's about collaborating learning between between peers of all different levels. So there's a couple vocab words that we're going to just run through here. So the first one is your zone of proximal development. So this is going to be the zone in which students are able to increase their skills by working with their peers. It is the zone that exists between one peer's knowledge and the others. So you have a peer with a lot of knowledge, and then you have one that needs some development. That zone that exists right in between is going to be your zone of proximal development. So this can be a good example of this. We can use some soccer examples, right? Each student is spending one-on-one time with the captain of the team because that might be their peer, but the knowledge level is different. And by floating around in the zone of proximal development, the student or the athlete is going to learn more. This is done through scaffolding. So the scaffolding is the extra push a child gets into furthering their knowledge when being paired with that peer. Think of it literally as scaffolding that allows a contractor to scale the side of the building. It's temporary, but it's incredibly effective in getting them from the bottom to the top. So example of this would be drills on the soccer field with the captain that includes some sort of demonstration or something like that. So the kid isn't just out on the field trying to learn on their own. He's physically seeing the captain do something, and then the captain is helping to guide the student through learning how to do those drills. So scaffolding is temporary, right? So once it's gone, cultural tools come into play. These are the tools that a student has access to further their own development and skill level. These tools can help bridge the gap once the scaffolding has been removed, as I said. So they can be all sorts of different cultural tools. An example of this could be watching YouTube videos to get more soccer pointers. Maybe the captain isn't there, but you kind of make a mistake, or you do something on the field and you say, okay, well, I need to figure out how to course correct. You could go and Google, I don't know, yellow cards or fouls or whatever the case may be in order to increase your knowledge. The next concept is the natural line of regression. So this is the line that bridges the gap between what the student knew and what the student now knows, right? Or kind of would be the opposite, right? After working with the peer. So the performance may not be as strong as when they were receiving the scaffolding, but the line represents the improvement. So let's say a kid on the soccer field never would score a goal. But after working with the peer for a couple of weeks, all of a sudden he scores 1 goal in the game after 3 attempts. So it's not as good as getting 3 out of 3 like maybe the captain would, but he did bridge the gap in getting, from 0 goals to the 1 goal. And then the last little point that I want to touch on is reciprocal teaching. So teachers creating these relationships want to develop 4 key skills overall: summarizing, questioning, clarifying, and predicting. So the whole idea is that working with your peers and going back to this first kind of idea of collaborative learning is going to help students really increase their knowledge and their ability to apply it into the real world. So I hope by looking through this whole chart, I know it was a lot of information, that you were able to learn a little bit more about both of these wonderful theories and how to apply them in the future. Thanks so much for tuning in, and please feel free to scroll through these pages to get some more concrete examples and to learn a little bit more about these concepts.